Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Andrew Johnson, and I'm the chair of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, and I'm going to call our regular meeting for Tuesday, August 22nd to order. I'll now have the clerk call the roll.
Councilmember Payne.
Present.
Councilmember Wansley is absent. Councilmember Vita.
Present.
Olson.
Here.
Osman is absent. Goodman.
Present.
Jenkins is absent. Chavez.
Present.
Chugtai.
Present.
Kofsky is absent. Palmisano.
Present.
Vice Chair Rainville.
Present.
Chair Johnson.
Present.
We have 9 present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum, and also note that Council President Jenkins did reach out in advance and let us know that she was unable to attend today. Also note that we have a Hennepin County Commissioner with us, Irene Fernando. Thank you for being here, Commissioner. And we have one item today, which is a presentation by both our Intergovernmental Relations team and the Blue Line Extension. I'll now invite Katie Topinka, our IGR Director, to get us started.
With your permission, Mr. Chair, I will address this topic.
Welcome, Ms. Olson.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Johnson and committee members. I'm Lauren Olson, Senior Government Relations Representative, and I'm just going to briefly introduce this item and then turn it over to all of our experts that we have in the room today. So today I'm pleased that we are joined by the project team leading the Blue Line Extension project to provide all of you with an update on the status of that project as it's reaching some important milestones. So we appreciate that. You will also hear from Cura and Hennepin County about some anti-displacement work that has occurred, that the city also participated in a working group. So you'll hear that as well. So before we get started with that, though, I'd like you to hear from a couple city staff who have been a couple of many that have been very closely involved in this project to just talk a little bit about how the city is interacting with this project before we get started. So I want to invite Kathleen Mayall from Transportation Planning and Programming up, and Jim Vole, who's the interim planning manager for long range planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Mayall and Mr. Vold.
Thank you. There's a brief outline of what we'll be discussing. I'll spare you going through all of that, but we wanted to just set up that there is city involvement in this project. So we have the project office team, which is here. That's the Metropolitan Council, Metro Transit, and Hennepin County. But the city is a project partner, and we provide guidance for the alignment with adopted city plans. And we have a fairly large team from IGR, CPED, Public Works. Not all of them are here today, but certainly, for example, for CPED, we have people from business development and the small business team that are involved in this as well. And we also have staff from the communications. And then, of course, the elected officials are the ward offices and the mayor's office. Some of the work that the city uses to guide our evaluation of this project is obviously our comprehensive plan, Minneapolis 2040. There are 100 policies, many or most, which apply to the project, but some highlights of some very important ones that guide our work is Policy 15, which talks about transportation and equity. Policy 16, which talks about the impacts of environmental impacts of transportation, both positive and I suppose negative. And then Policy 87, which was an important policy, just talking about the overall status of the north side and thinking about how transit can foster those goals. Also, Public Works remember to advance my slides. Also, Public Works has the Transportation Action Plan, which is their more detailed adopted plan to implement those broader policies in Minneapolis 2040. So the Transportation Action Plan specifically talks about transit along high-capacity neighborhood-based transit along West Broadway from downtown Minneapolis to the suburbs. And then, of course, there's the Vision Zero Action Plan and the Racial Equity Framework for Transportation. And Ms. Mayall can certainly talk more about that as we go through the presentations. Some of the major benefits that we just wanted to point out that we see as a city staff is that this is a generational infrastructure investment. So, you know, a big investment that will last a long time. And we believe that it can provide frequent and reliable transit service. The adjacent work that'll be done on the streets connecting and in the area will make a safer street for all travel modes, for pedestrians, bikes, cars, and so forth. And then, of course, along the corridor where the work is done, there will be improvement to lighting and utilities. And there's many other benefits which you'll hear as the project office goes through their presentation. We also believe that a strong transportation system coupled with purposeful station area planning, which will come after an alignment is decided, because we can't really station area plan until we know where the stations are going to go, and with the anti-displacement work that you'll hear about, can provide improved mobility. And these next two bullet points really should be one, but access to education, employment, and services for the residents around the stations. And for the neighborhoods, there would be economic development and housing choice that comes along with these projects. And of course, meeting the goals for reduced carbon emissions. And now I'm going to hand it over to Kathleen.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Johnson, committee members. Thank you for having us this morning. My name is Kathleen Mayel. I am a supervisor transportation planner in our Public Works Transportation Planning Programming Office. What our current focus, just to share a little bit about where we're at currently with this project, first and foremost, anti-displacement. This project needs to work for the folks that it's serving, the people of Minneapolis, the people who live and own businesses and so on along the proposed corridor. We're going to be hearing quite a bit more about this later in the presentation. Second, that there's transit-oriented development opportunities, that we are constantly working toward our overall city-adopted policies and goals that Jim just spoke of, and that we are really looking for those opportunities along with this historic investment. That we are improving street design and safety. Many of the corridors along this alignment are high-injury streets identified through our Vision Zero program, and it is a priority for us to ensure that these streets become safer along with this investment. Additionally, access to stations. This is critical. Train tracks don't do a lot other than provide access to a station. So really looking at where and how many of those stations there are along this corridor, and that we are connecting them in an appropriate way for an urban context. And really looking to achieve, through this investment, the city's help achieve climate, prosperity, and mode shift goals, and that we're improving the health of our community through this investment. I wanted to share just a few high-level details as you get into a lot more of the specifics with the project team coming up about what we would see should this investment occur and what sort of real changes you'd see on our streets. There would be adjacent reconstructions of streets where the train is going down, and I've listed those corridors right now of where the proposed line would go, through the North Loop, up Washington, over on 21st, and along West Broadway to the city border. In addition, the county has committed to including West Broadway reconstruction from Knox to Lyndale as a part of this investment. There would be 2 transit malls potentially constructed as a part of this, both along 10th Avenue. That one is still, would it be a transit mall or would it be one-way traffic, as well as 21st Avenue North, a new bridge over the interstate, 4 stations in Minneapolis, as well as one just outside of Minneapolis at Lowry Avenue in Robbinsdale. There'd be changes to on-street parking on different corridors, improved sidewalks, which are desperately needed along several of these corridors, new bikeways, additional greening, lighting, and so on. Really importantly is the proposed property takings with this proposed alignment. And again, we will hear a lot about this. There's different types of takings. There's acquisition of land, there's acquisition of property, there's permanent acquisition of buildings that would need to happen to construct this line. And this is a really important focus of the city in ensuring that people are not displaced without a place to come back to, that they want to be along this corridor, and that we are making provisions concurrently with the investment of this transit project. So again, just to close up here, we're really focused on eliminating or mitigating those impacts, minimizing the property takings, huge focus on community engagement and ensuring folks in the communities that this transit will serve are engaged and aware and involved in the decision-making around this, and that there is that support from both the business and the community. There's several outstanding station discussions that we feel are really important to this discussion. The Lowry Station and ensuring good pedestrian access to that station, and then 2 potential stations, which you won't see proposed with the project team's presentation here in a minute, but potential stations we think deserve some more discussion, one at 29th Avenue North and one where Washington curves to the west at 21st on the east side of 94. There's still a lot to work out. What you're gonna see is conceptual designs or hardly, maybe not even quite conceptual designs. There's a lot to work out in terms of design choices, in particular the bridge over 94 and those potential transit malls, and that we're really looking to make complete streets in all the cases where this train would align with our street network. And then in closing, for the city portion here, just to highlight our major points of influence, there is an upcoming corridor management committee, which the mayor and councilmember Ellison sit on, where there will be a vote on a resolution of what gets studied next, which corridor is in our supplemental draft environmental impact statement. There will also be official city comments about that in the spring, a municipal consent process next summer, and throughout all, really strong staff level collaboration with the project team. We're in multiple meetings a week, and you have at your disposal, we have city resources here for additional questions after the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our project partners. Christine Beckwith is the Blue Line Project Director at Metro Transit, and Dan Solar is the Director of Transit and Mobility at Hennepin County.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Beckwith and Mr. Solar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Really excited to be here today. My name is Chris Beckwith. I am the project director for the Blue Line Extension project. I work for Metro Transit. I've been doing this work for about 15 years. Also worked on the Green Line LRT project, the original Blue Line, the Southwest Green Line Extension, and the Gold Line in the East Metro. So today we have several topics to go through. I'll do a quick project overview to get us started here. Dan will take over and go through the route modification process so you can see how we got to this point in our Blue Line 2.0, as we call it. We'll discuss the engagement to date, talk about the project status, specifically in Minneapolis, and then wrap it up with anti-displacement work and give you a presentation on that. So starting with the project overview, this shows the Blue Line extension. I'm not going to get into the specifics on the alignment here because we've got many slides to go through that, but it is located fully in Hennepin County, directly connecting Minneapolis with Robbinsdale, Crystal, and Brooklyn Park and the communities in the Northwest Metro. There was a modified route that was adopted last summer which had some options, which we've been studying over the last year. Those are shown in Minneapolis here on the lower part of the map. We are also implementing an anti-displacement work group and recommendations, first of its kind in the nation, and we're excited to be presenting that today on the Blue Line as well to really make a difference in how we're delivering this project. And then, as Kathleen and Jim mentioned, there's a policy recommendation next month for which route we will be studying in the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. So the Blue Line is actually part of the Metro system. It connects communities with fast, frequent, or reliable transportation. It's so frequent you don't even need a schedule. You can just show up at the station and wait for the next train or the bus to come along. This is bus rapid transit lines that are on highway right-of-way, that are on dedicated guideway. We've got gold and purple that are on dedicated busways. And then we've got light rail. Anything shown in gray here is the arterial bus rapid transit system. So it really is a rapidly expanding system. We're excited to expand this up to the Northwest Metro. It will provide a one-seat, single ride, the Blue Line extension, to any of those destinations on the existing Blue Line, and then a transfer to the Green Line, Orange Line, and other transit lines shown in the map here too. This is all about connecting to destinations around the Metro. This is not just a ride from Brooklyn Park to the Mall of America. This is more about the destinations in between, getting from North Minneapolis to the airport, getting from North Minneapolis up to Crystal or Robbinsdale, shopping, getting your errands done, getting dinner, those kinds of things. It's not about an end-to-end trip. So we show a few of the destinations here around the metro for the blue and green lines on this map, or on this slide as well. As Jim and Kathleen mentioned, this is about generational benefits. It's about connecting to new opportunities, education. We've heard a lot about building community wealth and that being a priority. Improving public health, reducing pollution, and then making this unprecedented transit investment in this corridor that has experienced a history of systemic racism and a high percentage of zero-car households. So really important investment in this community. To quickly go through the timeline, we're in this green box here right now. And in October, we would initiate the supplemental environmental impact statement process, and that's where we're gonna study the route that Dan will present in a few minutes. We'll continue the analysis on that route. We're really at the beginning of this process. Next summer is when we will be undertaking municipal consent with each of the cities, where we will be getting further along in the design, 30% design and beyond. So we're right at the beginning right now, but we'll be doing quite a bit of work in the next year. After that, we'll be doing final design, 2024 and 25, getting our federal funding, hopefully in 26. Construction is shown out there, 3 to 4 years, and hopefully opening in 2030. We wanted to talk a bit about the advisory process, and as Kathleen and Jim mentioned, we meet with them multiple times a week, for sure weekly, in what we call the issue resolution teams, the IRTs. Those meet every Thursday with Minneapolis, so we've been doing extensive work in those meetings to advance to where we are today. Minneapolis staff, Public Works, and CPED are part of that process. They are also part of the Technical Project Advisory Committee, the TPAC. The TPAC meets once a month prior to the Corridor Management Committee. We have a Community and Business Advisory Committee, CAC and BAC. They meet separately also once a month before the CMC, and then they report up to the CMC as well. Those are individuals that applied to be on each of those committees and were selected with the help of the city of Minneapolis and other cities. And so they're providing that feedback from the community and businesses. The Corridor Management Committee, the CMC, Mayor Fry and Councilmember Ellingson are part of that committee. We appreciate all the time and the effort and the meetings you've attended as well as all the public outreach we've done as well. Appreciate the city's support. And then all of those lead up to making recommendations to the Met Council and Hennepin County moving this project forward. Quickly, I wanted to talk about the project office leadership because this really is an integrated team of Metro Transit, Met Council, and Hennepin County. A little bit different model than we've used on past projects, but we find this is working out really well with us, and that's why you'll see Dan and Kathy presenting parts of the presentation today as well. So I'm the project director for Metro Transit. Dan is the former project director, actually, of the Blue Line, so he's going to be presenting the history in the next slides on the route modification. But we also have Kathy Gold, who is with the county and embedded in our project team as well, focusing on anti-displacement and several other things. Nick Landwehr is our Director of Design and Engineering, a Metro Transit employee, and then outreach led by Nakongo. And we'll be hiring a Deputy Project Director that will be a Hennepin County employee as well. So we're really excited about this integrated team, and we see Minneapolis as part of that as well, and we've built that strong partnership with Minneapolis in moving forward with our decisions as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan to take us through the route modification process.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Solar.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chair and members. Dan Solar from Hennepin County, Director of Transit and Mobility. Happy to be here today to talk a little bit about this project. And I'm going to start a little bit here with a little bit of the history on how did we get here today. So I was certainly presenting on the project you see on the screen a number of times in the past. At the end, I had the great opportunity to lead the construction work on Central Corridor till opening day in 2014 along University Avenue and through the University of Minnesota. And then in 2015 came on and formed the Blue Line Extension Project Office. And the project at that time that we worked on from 2015 to 2020 was essentially the route you see on the screen. Same mode, LRT, same termini, Target Field Station to Northern Brooklyn Park, but a very different alignment, especially in the city of Minneapolis. The intention was, of course, to leave Target Field and head down 6th Avenue, Olson Memorial Highway, make a quick right turn onto the BNSF Railroad Corridor, and then use the BNSF Rail Corridor for 8 miles until we transitioned into Brooklyn Park. And through numerous attempts to advance this particular project and a lot of engineering done and a complete environmental documentation work and study completed, we just simply were unable at Met Council and Hennepin County to agree and come to a resolution with Burlington Northern on an alignment. That's too bad, but maybe it's not too bad. There's some good parts and bad parts about that. Negatively, of course, is that we advanced this project for so many years and moved this forward. We were going to rebuild Highway 55. Those are things we're not able to do. The good parts are we believe we're now maybe serving a little bit more of the transit needs in the city of Minneapolis, and we are, I think, in the end, ending up with a very good and buildable alignment. We also I've witnessed on another project the challenges of working adjacent to an active railroad, and that is something we do not have to do as well, which has got some positives. So in August of 2020, or about 3 years ago from now, is when we made this difficult decision to make a pivot on this project, to in fact eliminate or stop attempting to advance the project on the railroad right away and looking for something different, to try to build an LRT alignment that went from Target Field Station to North Brooklyn Park through the same essential communities without using railroad right-of-way. So that began in August of 2020. We identified a number of possible routes and then narrowed down our analysis to utilizing generally West Broadway as a route, or generally Washington to Lowry as a route. And we did the draft route modification report, which I believe we were at here at City of Minneapolis at the Public Works Committee in the early part of 2022 to talk about that, to make our recommendations, and that resulted in a route recommendation to utilize West Broadway, adopted by the Corridor Management Committee through the report with a number of alternatives, and you can kind of see those a little bit on the bottom right corner, but a number of alternatives on the south end. So generally West Broadway, but some alternatives on the south end. This was a little bit of the analysis that was done. Both Lowry and West Broadway were good routes. They were not, it wasn't like a pass-fail here. It was good and better. And so the general feeling was that West Broadway served more destinations, served more people, had a better base infrastructure in order to build the project, and so that became the recommendation that we moved forward with. And then through that time, we spent a great deal of time in a coming out of COVID time frame of attempting to really do public engagement. And we did. We talked to a lot of people back and forth about the Lowry versus West Broadway piece. We had to get creative with public engagement. Chris is going to talk a lot about public engagement, but we've had to get creative, especially in this time, using virtual methods, using in-person stuff, using small groups, large groups, and all different kinds of things. And through all of that, we still hear from some folks what we think Lowry would be better. Obviously, anywhere we build this project is going to have impacts, and those impacts will need to be addressed and mitigated on either alternative, but we're comfortable that coming out of that and beginning about maybe a year and a half ago, we've not, since then been settling on the West Broadway route. And then Chris is going to talk next a little bit about engagement, and then I'm going to come up and kind of walk through the preferred route along the West Broadway alternative as we go forward.
So I'll quickly touch on engagement. Dan will also go through specific feedback we heard when he does the next part of the presentation. I first wanted to talk about our engagement principles. When we did the route modification, we took a look at the engagement principles we had and wanted to make sure that we were working on those, as well as design principles as we move forward with the route modification. So one of the first bullet here, honoring and building on previous robust community engagement. So that is definitely something we've expanded on. We didn't start over. We had a lot of work already done that we were able to use. And then we've just adapted, we've tailored, we've done, and I'll talk about some of the strategies we've used for engagement. If we don't feel like we're getting to folks, we would change the approach, we would change the style of the outreach, whether it was an open house type forum, whether it was a presentation, open mic. We allow the community to actually come and speak to our corridor management committee. And so we're continuing to adapt and trying to get those community voices at the front of our work here. A few metrics here from August to July showing just how many events we've had once we've done the pivot here to the Blue Line 2.0, as we call it. Just many events, different contacts, comments on surveys, interactive map comments, comment forms, postcards mailed, over 26,000 postcards mailed, 3,000 emails and phone calls. So just quite a bit of conversation we've had with the community. It's been an honor to get to know this community. I've been working on this project for the last year. I rejoined the team, and it's just been an honor to really get to know what's important with this community and then adapt to try to be the best project that this can be serving this community. A few of the activities, Dan mentioned a few of these. We've done the community meetings and workshops where we've just flooded it with our staff and had individual one-on-one conversations, and then also some formal presentations. We've done business workshops, bike tours, pop-up, tabling at community events, and we're constantly trying to come up with new ideas to do different types of engagement as well. And then engagement through partnerships. As I mentioned, we have a strong partnership, Metro Transit, Met Council, with Hennepin County. And here's just a few examples of Hennepin County programs. Elevate Hennepin, Cultivate Arts, which was managed out in contracts out of Hennepin County in close coordination with the project office. Of course, the anti-displacement work group that we will talk about. And then Community Cohorts, which is a program where we actually contract with local community groups to be kind of an extension of our outreach. So they'll do flyering, they'll do door knocking, they'll get that information out to the community because they have even better connections than we do. Some of the positive engagement themes, and Dan will get into this as well, are shown here. Additional stops is something we heard, and we were able to do that. Less traffic impacts, connections, affordable housing, criminal activity as far as activating streets so that we can hopefully deter some of that criminal activity, and just having opportunities for businesses and residents. Some of the concerns, and we'll talk about this as well, loss of parking, loss of business, business impacts, building impacts, safety. Here's just a few of the themes we've heard. And as I mentioned, Dan will get into that in the next part of our presentation, which is the project status in Minneapolis.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And so, Chair and members, I am super excited to present this piece, which to me summarizes not just a short period, but really the 3 years since we decided to make the pivot from the previous alignment to the new. And this represents a summary for you as council members of what we are recommending as a project team as the preferred route for the light rail alignment and initial station locations throughout the city of Minneapolis that would be then advanced in the supplemental draft environmental impact statement. So what you see on the left is really what I would call what we started with coming out of the route recommendation report that I had up before, where we said, okay, we're thinking it's going to be West Broadway, that's the recommendation, and then here's some general station areas, and then you see a bit of a colored spaghetti map there on the south side about what the possibilities were. Lyndale, Washington, do we cross the freeway at 21st? Do we cross at West Broadway? Do we cross down at 7th Street? How do we come into downtown? And that was all part of kind of narrowing down to the map you'll see on the right, where I'm going to talk about 5 distinct areas, 5 pieces through Minneapolis, where our staff recommendation is on how to take the map on the left and bring it down to the map on the right. So I'm going to start, so first of all, before we start with that, these design principles are pieces that we adopted with the Corridor Management Committee right in 2020 as we were making the pivot, saying this is going to be LRT, we're going to try to maximize ridership, we're going to keep this project in the federal queue, so we want to continue it to be an FTA New Starts project. We've got to be able to serve destinations, minimize residential and commercial impact. And these are all with us all throughout the process. So as we make any design decisions, these are always in the back of our mind, in the back of the city's mind, in the back of our project team's mind on how we move forward and implement the project. So the first piece I want to talk about, we're going to start from the north and come down to Target Field. So as we come into the city of Minneapolis, this is really the segment that comes into Minneapolis and runs through the Penn Avenue intersection. We're recommending center running LRT on Penn Avenue, on West Broadway through, from Lowry down through the Penn intersection. Would be at grade street running with a station in and around the Lowry area and a station at Penn. So why Lowry? Well, one of the big opportunities that was unable to be kind of grasped with the last LRT alignment was the ability to serve kind of the North Memorial Hospital campus, both the clinics, the hospital, the offices, the ability for employees and users there to have access. And so a station in and around Lowry that serves both the hospital campus, the Grand Rounds, the residential, both Robbinsdale and Minneapolis residents up in that area is very important. I want to go back to a little piece Kathleen talked a little bit about earlier is our discussion about 29th. So 29th lies just about, roughly about where the arrow is there, where it says track center running from Lowry to Irving, just south of there. We are right now getting mixed feelings about our proposed station at Lowry, where because the county had to rebuild the West Broadway bridges right at the border, we kind of come around the corner and go up in the air, and that station's up in the air. And I'm not seeing a lot of love for that station up in the air. Councilmember Vita will, I think, see it from her kitchen. And so we are looking at ways. The bridges present a challenge to us. We couldn't wait to reconstruct the West Broadway bridges. In fact, one of them was closed already because of condition. So we had to move forward. We weren't able to quickly pivot and get LRT built on those bridges. So now we're trying to figure out how to leave the bridges essentially intact and get through that area and go through the Grand Rounds and deal with Theodore Wirth and serve the hospital and serve 29th. And so LRT through this area, yes. A station in this area, maybe one at Lowry, between Lowry and 29th, maybe two, one at Lowry and one at 29th, still in the mix. But the general piece is to come through here and serve residents, both cities, the hospital, the Grand Rounds, those areas in here. That takes us down to Penn. Certainly Penn Avenue is a spot that's been identified as a strong connection for a station. The C line runs north and south through there, which provides a connection. The Capri is there, other commercial, and of course, very dense residential in Minneapolis, in and along there. You see Neon's got the proposal for their food incubator right there. But the challenges around a Penn station are around parking, are around fitting LRT through there, and around some property acquisition. And so one of the buildings that we have identified as needing to be acquired is probably the 5 Points building, right on the southwest corner of Penn and West Broadway. We're trying to protect the new buildings. We're trying to protect the small more locally owned or black-owned businesses along the south side, or I guess it's kind of the south or the east side of Penn and West Broadway there. And so that may be one that has to be acquired. Of course, there's also some businesses north of there that are closed, that are acquired as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit about right-of-way acquisition in general. So this area, I'm going to talk a little bit about in each of these areas, some of the engagement that we've done. We've had quite a bit of engagement with businesses. This represents one of our West Broadway Penn business meetings up at the Capri. We've had a number of these where we've brought folks in, had kind of a roundtable discussion, taken some feedback, visited with each of the various property owners. We have talked to all of the property owners in and around this intersection, some positive, some cool, some negative. I will say, when we first embarked on this, just in general, I like to say we've got a lot of, there certainly are some people that are, we really want it. Some people are, we really don't want it. And a lot of people are in the middle that said, we're interested on what this could do to the community, but we really need to know about what those impacts will be and how we will be protected in that process. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the anti-displacement work. But things like safety, things like parking, things like how to kind of squeeze light rail through this area of Penn has been a big topic here. So the number two area is kind of this area which we kind of would refer to as the segment of West Broadway between the freeway and about James. We'll be center running down through the curves. You can see where the new buildings are, the new Sherman buildings are that are just open. We would be center running there. And then we really analyzed not so much which of these would make a better LRT route, but looking at 21st and West Broadway as a parallel set of streets, where was the best spot to put the light rail tracks? And we started all the way from what if we had options that looked at splitting the tracks, putting one direction on West Broadway, one direction on 21st. We had an option that made 21st and West Broadway a roadway, one-way pair, kind of like Lagoon and Lake, which was extremely negatively received by the businesses along West Broadway. They did not want to see the street split up. And so what we centered on, what we've, through many meetings, we had Juxtaposition create a model of this area and look at impacts. We are recommending that at James, the tracks would transition up to 21st and follow 21st, east and west, all the way over the freeway, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then West Broadway would be also reconstructed, but would not have the tracks. And so the way we're kind of looking at this now, and these slides lay this out a little bit better. Did I go through that too fast? The way we look at this now is we kind of look at it as one corridor from kind of the north right-of-way line on 21st to the south right-of-way line on West Broadway. And what we're trying to figure out is where should we build LRT tracks? Where should there still be parking? Where should there still be turn lanes? Which direction makes sense to have traffic? Where should the bikes go? Where should the pedestrian improvements go? And how can we green these two corridors? I mean, this really becomes a way to serve businesses and other things. I'm going to show you this slide right here, the different kind of things that might be able to happen on West Broadway if the tracks are on 21st. Now, why not all on West Broadway? Well, we could put everything on West Broadway, but then all of a sudden, if you want everything on West Broadway and these things to happen to the avenue there as well, then there's a discussion of buying more right away than we are recommending. So we wanted to minimize that piece as well.
Thank you. We have a comment or question from Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering, there's a lot of residential homes, it looks like, on 21st. And so what does that mean for them? Are you talking about buying out all those houses? And what if they don't want to have their front yard be a rail station? If they're on 21st, they would not be on West Broadway, assuming West Broadway was the kind of commercial corridor. But now it looks like you're kind of, I can't see, as detailed as I would like, but where does that leave all those homeowners and renters who live on West Broadway? They're now going to have a train directly in front of their house. And they wouldn't have a reason to think that that would be the case because they're not on a commercial corridor. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about offering everybody the opportunity to relocate.
Mr. Solar?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Goodman, great question. In terms of that, it is definitely a different character on 21st. It's a residential street, and it is on the south side, primarily bordered by kind of the backside or of the business corridor, and on the north side of 21st, pretty much fully residential. Some multifamily and some single family. Most of those single family homes along 21st are what I would constitute side yards, right? There's very little access out on the 21st. But it's still residential property along there. Where we're widening for, say, a station, some of those homes are potentially going to become acquisitions. All of them do not have to become acquisitions. We will certainly need to develop a cross-section there that can show people how we can do various levels of screening or other design elements to allow them to coexist. We would put the sidewalk, we would put the tracks on the south side, put a sidewalk on the north side as a buffer, but certainly it's a light rail track along what's now a residential street, which is very different. And so if individual property owners wanted to be purchased or wanted to be relocated, part of our, even though sounds, anti-displacement means how do we keep people in the community or make them whole or make them, still be part of it. So the ability to acquire additional properties is a possibility. The ability for people to stay is also a possibility as well. So we'll have to look at each of those. We've visited with many of the property owners along there. Some are owners, single-family homeowners. Some are renters, and we've talked with the people that live there, and we've attempted or talked to a number of the owners as well. And so we're certainly working out kind of what a cross-section looks like and how we'll kind of make those properties whole. So it is a little, we're trying to not balance is it better to acquire some single-family homes and very few commercial properties, or should we acquire more commercial properties? And so we're trying to find a balance here where that works. Obviously, no acquisition is not going to be an answer, but minimizing the spots and doing that as part. But it will definitely change the character of 21st.
Mr. Chair, I'm also just curious what the city's adopted comprehensive plan, which was adopted by the Metropolitan Council, says about that street. So should you put a light rail line on what's probably an interior 3, I would guess, but I don't know, and you put a rail line down there, it would probably be a scenario where developers would come in and potentially start buying out some houses but not others to put in more high density. How is that consistent with anti-displacement work? Essentially it's going to start knocking houses out all the way blocks north, because if you take 21st and then people don't want to be next to the rail line, so they sell to a developer who puts up a 4-story building, then their single family house is immediately adjacent to a 4-story building. Again, it's one thing if you live on West Broadway. It's another if you're a block off, and the comprehensive plan just adopted essentially tells people what you can expect. And now we're saying you can't maybe not expect that. And that, I fear, would be a cause for displacement.
Chair Johnson, Councilmember Goodman, absolutely. That's part of why does moving forward with an LRT on 21st mean that scenario has to be changed? Does the city, what is the city's goal on what development wants to be along there? And does it mean it should be changed? Should the city move forward and adopt a different zoning code for that, for something along there and make that happen? That could be a possibility as well.
Or perhaps the possibility is the Metropolitan Council and the county look at what our adopted comprehensive plan is and make changes based on what we said through a collaborative process over 3 years, what our community told us they wanted. I mean, I worry about it up in Councilmember Vitaw's ward as well. I mean, does that mean then Victory Memorial Drive, if there's a spot there, might be a spot for some high-rise construction? So I do think that someone should be looking, not us, somebody should be looking at the adopted comprehensive plan. And since it's adopted by the Met Council, I would think you guys would have that documentation in front of you and take a look at what the city also calls for.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. You know, and as you're making these comments, I personally am reflecting on development activity I saw over in Richfield off of 77th, or Highway 77 and 66th Street. And over time, as it grew with commercial activity, all of the single-family homes that were across the road from it saw increased traffic, increased noise, all of that, and eventually, I must assume the city of Richfield came in, bought all the homes out, built 4 or 5-story apartments, that sort of thing. And so it's completely changed as a result, but you see how activity over time ends up forcing the change to the streetscape. So that's a point well raised.
And Chair,
Mr. Sawyer.
and for all this, I'm going to keep going with the engineering piece, but this topic that Councilmember Goodman brings up is, it's really leaning into exactly the reason why having some kind of an anti-displacement working group in place is part of this work, right? Yes, a major transit investment like an LRT project has the opportunity and the ability to change the dynamics in the land use around where it's built. But it doesn't have to. If part of what we want to do is maximize the benefits that the project can bring for the people that are already here, then that's part of what we want to focus on. And so there may need to be strategies in place to just simply not allow some of the things that are being there. Not building the project is one way to do that. Nothing will change if nothing gets done, maybe, but doesn't mean we can't provide a transit improvement of this sort that can serve the people that are there today. And that's really part of what the anti-displacement work wants to get after. And so these guys will talk a little bit about that as well. So again, as we kind of go back, I want to go back to some of the engagement summary we did here. We had a lot of discussions about 21st versus West Broadway. And I can tell you, I can point to people that are diametrically on one side or the other. This track has got to be on 21st. It will kill West Broadway if it's on West Broadway. And I have other people that have said, if it's on 21st, that's going to be super negative for West Broadway. So, and there certainly are a lot of views on that point. We don't say 21st or West Broadway anymore. We say 21st and West Broadway. This is about that corridor. This is about that segment of the city and how we make improvements on both of those segments of road in order to make this work. So we've had a model prepared by Juxta. The students there did a great job of kind of laying those two out. We've had a lot of public meetings, a lot of outreach, a lot of different themes that came out of this. Again, things like parking and things like impact to businesses and residences were certainly high. We got a lot of positives about this, and we certainly got a lot of concerns as well. And so the West Broadway 21st has been a big discussion point for us. What do the stations do? We started with one station between the freeway and Penn, and now we've got 2 proposed. We've got one kind of on the diagonal from when we transition between 21st and West Broadway. That's over by the YMCA, over by the Davis Center, close to the D line, serves Metro, serves North Commons Park, serves North High's athletic field. And so that has been, that comes out to be a pretty good station area. And then down by Lyndale, we're able to serve numerous churches, the Kemp's building, and other spots along the north side. So those pieces, we've now got 2 stations proposed in that area. So this takes us to how do we get across the freeway? So when we decided, or when we're recommending that we be on 21st, we've now also recommended that we cross the freeway at 21st. But there's not a bridge there today. So we would propose a bridge crossing on 21st across the freeway. And when we started, we thought, well, we will just build a bridge that carries the LRT over I-94 north of West Broadway. And as we further expanded and looked at this area, we think that providing a better bridge that can actually connect the east and west sides of the north side is something that presents a real possibility and a real significant positive option for us. I'm super excited about this piece. I was struggling with how we were going to like cross these freeway ramps and build. We had bridges. I mean, many of you have maybe heard about we were going to be up over bridges and build bridges over the freeway that went over the ramps. And we've since kind of brought this down to a more reasonable scale. We're proposing to cross the I-94 off-ramp to West Broadway at grade, meaning that becomes the intersection for the end of the ramp rather than West Broadway. So that allows us then to build a bridge that can serve more than just LRT. It can serve pedestrians as a pedestrian crossing, as bikes as a bike crossing, and vehicles maybe as another option to bring vehicles from east to west over I-94 that maybe take some pressure off of some of the intersections of West Broadway and the I-94 ramps, which are congested, which are in Hennepin County and Minneapolis's plans, high accident intersections, high crash rate intersections that need some work. So are these all the modes? Maybe. Even just the possibility of letting Kemp's trucks come up off the freeway, turn right on 21st, and not go up to West Broadway keeps all of those trucks out of that much more heavily pedestrian area up along West Broadway. So this is part of what we're recommending. The tracks would come across, potentially traffic, bikes, pedestrians, to really try to link the east and west side. And maybe also looking at adjacent improvements that help connect the north side to the river and really bring those pieces together. So that's what we're looking at 21st. So then we make a turn and come down Washington Avenue, and our proposal would be to run at grade LRT on Washington Avenue from 21st through West Broadway, down along that segment, and to have a station on Washington Avenue just north of Plymouth, just south of Plymouth, between Plymouth and 10th Avenue. You can see it would serve kind of what I sometimes call the north loop, or the north edge of the north loop. There's opportunities for other things to happen along here. A lot of outreach here, a lot of visits with the Twin Cities International School and some of our key stakeholders around this area to look at what are their main thoughts and concerns through this area. Again, parking and how it can help serve jobs and other destinations in this area. This is a little bit of a rendering of what this might look like. This looks south, so this is looking south down Washington Avenue. Could have a center running LRT. We'd reconstruct Washington Avenue with LRT in the center, traffic, bikes, pedestrians on either side, and this would be just north of Plymouth. So it has the opportunity to serve folks across the Plymouth Bridge as well in this area. So then our last segment then is, if we end up here at Washington Avenue and 10th Avenue, how do we get to Target Field? So we're proposing that we come down 10th Avenue and Oak Lane, make the turn on to 7th Street, and then follow 7th Street up to Target Field. Now, the city and the county and the project office have talked about reconstruction on 7th. Chair, did you want to?
Oh, please finish your thought. I got a couple.
Yeah, are working on a project to reconstruct 7th, so we're working on incorporating that into the project as well. And really, the most difficult piece in this segment is that boxed out section that you see there on 10th Avenue, kind of between the viaducts, where the viaducts cross over, and Washington Avenue. This is what it looks like today. There's parking on both sides. There's one lane in each direction. We've got the Redwell and 918 lofts. So what we've really been challenged on here is how can we build LRT on this segment of 10th Avenue without acquiring right-of-way, without buying fairly brand new buildings, the parking garage and the Redwell on the north side, 918 lofts and the Salvation Army on the south. How can we make that work? We can't have through traffic, parking, bikes, pedestrians, LRT, and all that in there without doing it. So we're looking at a couple of different options here on that 1-2 block segment between the viaducts and over. One is to build a transit mall where we would have LRT on one side, a two-way bike and emergency vehicle lane on the north side of 10th Avenue, and then sidewalks and boulevards north of that. This is a little bit about a winter look there. So we've worked with the fire department. The fire department likes this option because they like the option of not having traffic to contend with. And then some snow, and we can show that we've got room for that. The other option is to leave one-way northbound open to traffic. And so have a one-way street through here. LRT would now be on the north side. And so we're going to look at both of these options. Really, the key here becomes a kind of a two-piece traffic study. How much of the traffic that uses 10th Avenue uses it to go through? And where would that traffic go? And how would it get redistributed? And what improvements might be necessary for that redistributed traffic? And then what traffic that uses 10th Avenue is there because it's accessing the parking garage or 916 or the Redwell or any of the pieces right there? And then how do we get people in and out of this area? I have a little experience here. We got rid of the traffic on Washington Avenue through the University of Minnesota campus. And so this is a little bit like that same kind of thing. How are we dealing with the two kinds of traffic through this area? So that's the piece that we're focusing on there.
All right. Now might be a good time to pause because we do have 4 council members lined up in our queue. So are you at a good spot?
I got like one or two
All
more
right.
slides. So this just talks a little bit about the engagement we've done, the work that we've done there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about right-of-way, but maybe before I do that, we can certainly take some questions about some of these route pieces.
All right, that sounds good. First, we have Councilmember Payne with a comment or question.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Yeah, I was curious, so much of this discussion is hypothetical and what's going to be the hypothetical impact on the corridor, but we do have actual experience with the Green Line going through University Avenue, and I'm wondering, have there been any comprehensive studies of the impact of that route selection?
Chair, Councilmember Payne, I've got both my own direct knowledge of impacts, having been, standing there every day for 4 years doing the construction and working with businesses along there. And then also, seeing some things that have and haven't happened along the corridor. One of the things that I always go back to is there was this request to add additional stations on University Avenue, if you remember that. And so one of the reasons to add additional stations was both to serve riders and to provide economic development opportunities in some of the intersections where those stations are built. And I can tell you right now, I'm seeing some level of development at each of those sites. So, some businesses did well, some businesses did not. Some of it was due to construction, some of it was not due to construction. So there's kind of what are the impacts from construction on the businesses, and how do you kind of get through that process? And then what are the long-term impacts to both people that are there and then people that want to be there in the future? Again, it goes back to what do we as communities and leaders want the end result to look like, and how can we use our displacement and anti-displacement policies to help guide that? Do we want to see significant redevelopment? Do we want to see people stay? Do we want to make it advantageous for people to stay? Those kind of things can all be implemented to help get us to the end we want it to look like.
Thank you, Councilmember. Next, we have Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have you ever been in the North Loop? Because I don't know how you get there from south of downtown, Loring Park, Royalston, Border, if you don't take 10th Avenue. Because 3rd Avenue was taken out for the baseball stadium. 2nd Avenue South is a one-way. Then you get into 1st Avenue downtown. So how do people who are on the west side of downtown actually get to Washington Avenue if you take out the one connector, which is 10th Street? I guess I'd call that 10th Avenue.
10th Avenue.
South. I just cannot even remotely imagine. You'll have no, because of the highway viaduct that blocks access to the North Loop anyway, there's no through streets there. 6th is the closest thing to a through street. It's also a brick road, so it's extremely slow. Where will all the traffic? Think about the bank has an entrance right there. I mean, I just can't even imagine how you would be encouraging people from Loring Park all the way over to this new route district, potentially where the Southwest LRT stop is going to be. How would cars get to Washington Avenue if you don't have 10th?
Chair, council member, I think that's part of what we really need to dig into when we take a look at, should it be a transit mall only, or should it have at least the one-way street that comes from the east over to Washington Avenue? And can we develop enough connections to make it viable to close the street entirely, in which case the bikes and can be there, or should we leave one lane of traffic open to get vehicles through there and then redistribute the bikes to a different location? That'll be part of the balance that we work on with Minneapolis traffic. Yes, the 6th goes through, but you're right, there isn't a route that goes through north of 6th. We did look at, and what about if we connect 8th? What if we connect 8th through? But if we do that, we go through some parcels that are certainly available for redevelopment. And that's not necessarily desired by the North Loop area as well. So this will be part of our ongoing analysis to determine both how do we get people from A to B that want to use 10th Avenue to get through, how do we get them around, and then how do we get people directly to those spots there? It will be a challenge,
It
there's
is
no
a
doubt.
huge challenge, and I kind of feel like you're kind of poo-pooing it. Is not that big of a deal. Tell me how you get from Royalston to Washington Avenue if you take out 10th.
Well, Chair, we're certainly not poo-pooing it, because this is obviously something, I mean, you can, there are ways you can wind through roads to do that. Is that really what we want? How many people want to make the move that you, and do on a regular basis, that you've just identified? We've got to identify all of those pieces.
Well, I
find out how to
represent
make
people
work.
that live in the Loring Park neighborhood and in the Central Business District and in the Bryn Mawr neighborhood, and we like to go to the North Loop. We think downtown is good. We want to go there. We want to patronize all of the restaurants. You're telling us essentially if you're in a car, you can't go there because there isn't a way to get there. I mean, we're talking a very long stretch from Nowheresville to the west. There's no way you can get through there. Otherwise, you'd be taking Plymouth all the way down to 2nd Avenue, which is a one-way. 2nd Avenue, which is a one-way, and then 1st Avenue, which is kind of a one-way. The city was developed with a grid system, and you guys seem to be intent on eliminating the grid system. And so I guess I would probably work with Councilmember Ellison to talk about how this would work. And if I was Councilmember Rainville, I don't know that I'd vote for municipal consent if there wasn't a way to get into the ward that I represent. I don't think the people in North Loop want a gated community, and that's kind of what you're proposing by eliminating traffic in both directions on 10th Avenue South, North.
Chair,
Thank you,
Councilmember,
Council.
noted. Key piece for us to take on as we look at these pieces.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Vice Chair Rainville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So could you go back to the slide about your community engagement that you had in the North Loop especially? I'm just looking, I did not see anything on the North Loop Neighborhoods Zoning and Planning Committee.
So, Chair, we have been working back and forth with the North Loop Neighborhood Association to get a time. We've been attempting to get on their agendas. We've been working with them. We believe we're going to be at their September meeting to provide a presentation. But we do know that is a hole we need to fill. We have not been successful in being able to nail down a time with the North Loop Neighborhood Association. We've certainly visited with all of the businesses around there, but that's a key piece that we need to do. Yes, we definitely agree.
Okay. And there's an earlier comment by you, I believe, thinking, I've already forgotten your name, I'm sorry, about improved safety for the area. And what really concerns me is if you choke down Washington Avenue, which this will do, human beings they're smart, right? They figure it out. So they're going to go down 2nd Street North. That's already a problem. I've already been in conversations with our Public Works Department about some incredibly dangerous intersections there. And as you move forward, you need to really understand the semi-freeway, the full freeway that 2nd Street North is. So just put that in your book, try and understand.
Chair, council member, 2nd Street North, you're saying just to the east of
Right, 'cause you're
Washington
gonna
Avenue?
Sure, think about it. You're gonna choke
Okay.
Washington down in one lane, so people, especially people who've had a couple drinks, it's crazy there now, it's gonna get even worse, especially the intersection of 5th and 2nd Street, 5th Avenue and 2nd Street.
So we'll have to, yep, that'll have to be a piece of.
And then my last comment is, I couldn't agree more with Councilmember Goodman about blocking off access from that western part of the city to the North Loop. And I'm just skeptical. I just can't see this working. This is and I understand why you stopped the Lindale route. I understand that completely. But now you've come into this area without a lot of forethought, and you're just trying to take 10 pounds of sugar and fit it in a 5-pound bag. So I look forward to continuing discussions.
Very good, very good.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councilmember Vita.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. Thanks for the presentation. I have lots of concerns, like a lot of concerns. And the Blue Line conversation has been going on a really, really long time. And it seems to be one that just keeps changing. I remember being on the Blue Line commission that Blong Yang appointed me to a long time ago. And that was the Olson Highway route. And that was supposed to be the one, right? And then something happened and we changed that. So I have lots of concerns. My biggest concern, though, is as the person who represents Ward 4, I feel like we always get left out. Like the north side is seen as Broadway, and that's a very small part of the north side. What do the people who I represent in Camden get out of this? It's nowhere near that part of the north side. There's nowhere that the people of, some of the Victory neighborhood who needs a bus route right now. They have no public transportation that is reliable, that has been consistent. They've lost a lot of routes in, the most northern part of the city. And so I'm concerned about those things. Also, I've had conversations with the hospital and the park board about the concerns with the Lowry Avenue. It seems like it's gonna be a tower. Like we're gonna have a skyscraper over a bridge that was just reconstructed that I think looks very beautiful and complementary to Victory Memorial and the highway. How tall is that structure? How tall would it be if the proposed route happened?
Chair, council member, it would be taller than the bridges are there today.
Taller than the current bridge that is?
The current bridge that is there today, because we have to go over and then over and around. So yes, it would be. And that's why we're hearing exactly what you're saying about that design. And we are at the drawing board again.
So have you had conversations with the park board and the hospital about that?
Councilmember, Chair, Councilmember, yes.
Okay.
We were at the park board with a presentation. Certainly we noted that, and we meet, of course, with the hospital quite a bit as well. Now, originally, one of the things that has changed is originally there was one of the benefits of that design was that the hospital contemplated a direct connection. where there maybe would be a skyway or something that went from the station into the hospital. They're not desiring of that anymore.
Okay.
I think Lake Street and what's happening in other, they don't necessarily want to see that direct connection. That again opens up the ability to look at a number of different alternatives as well.
The other thing is we have a huge project happening in the ward, the Upper Harbor Terminal, that's going to be very dense with housing. There's going to be entertainment, a component of it. Have we considered that in this design?
Chair, Councilmember, yes, we considered that in the original Lowry West Broadway piece. And again, while certainly that was a favor there, West Broadway still rose to the top. I do want to bring up, though, that this is an LRT project, but it is a transit project, not the only transit project. And so part of this and part of what we heard exactly from this, various council members is kind of now that West Broadway is the preferred route for LRT, let's double down on the possibility of arterial BRT on Lowry. And so that is a complementary piece that we want to, you can't put an LRT line in, which is tracks, and then think, well, that serves everyone, right? There still has to be a supplemental transit network as well. And so bringing arterial BRT on Lowry can help address, council members, some of the things that you brought up.
So could we maybe work on the other things now while we're working all of this out? It'd be nice to have some, good lines going through the north side right now, down Lowry, down Dowling, down Washington. Like, there's so many opportunities I feel like we could be working on right now that would help. And, because this has been, 14 years, 10, 14. We don't know how long this is going to take. So could we maybe work on the other stuff right now?
Well, certainly there are ears here with Metro Transit leadership that are hearing that as well, council member, and we can, we can work on the parallel activities that help supplement a good LRT project to make it all work, to serve the network. So, what the things I'm hearing today is, what about people that want to come from the other side to get to North Loop? How are they going to get there? What about people that are on Lowry and on the north side of the north side? How do they get served with transit? And so all those connections start to feed together.
Okay, thank you. And just lastly, I want to shout out Josie and Cassius. They're both here with us today. Cassius is starting kindergarten, and he's a Ward 4 resident. Well, he's very busy right now, but welcome to the meeting. And I think Josie left. They are working with Commissioner Fernando on being a future elected official. So thank you to both of them.
Excellent.
So, Chair, just a few more slides before we go to the anti-displacement.
We do have another
okay.
yes in queue. So thank you, Council Member. Vice Chair Rainville.
Thank you. So you and I are of an age where we'd understand the trust but verify a statement by one of our ex-presidents. So I trust what you say about community engagement, especially with the business community, but I'm going to verify that, and I will be involved making sure that happens and their voices are heard, because there is not a more dynamic urban residential entertainment district in the city than the North Loop. And whatever this route does, it cannot hurt it. And that's very, very important that this North Loop residential entertainment district is not hurt by this.
Chair, Councilmember, thank you. Absolutely. In fact, I have some hope that it can help, right? I mean, if a station at Plymouth and Washington can help generate another transit alternative for people to get to and from the North Loop without impacting the ability for the businesses and residential people that are there to be able to continue to thrive where they are, then I think that opportunity is there as well. So let's find a way to make it not only not get hurt, but even get better.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Mr. Solar, please.
So just a
continue.
few things. I want to talk a little bit about right-of-way. There will be right-of-way acquisition that's part of the project. I really want to emphasize Number two, identification of a preferred route allows the project to focus discussion on potential property acquisition. We've had a lot of maps out there, as Councilmember Ellison and others can attest to, that show maybe an impact here, maybe an impact here, maybe an impact here. And people become very frustrated, as they should, about, well, I'm trying to make plans. Is this going to be a potential acquisition? Is it not? So one of the things that narrowing it down a little bit starts to let us concentrate on the specifics and help people plan. People that now we're maybe going to have some kind of an acquisition, temporary or partial, can now move on and say, I don't. And some people that now will can start to make plans for what they maybe want to do as part of that as well. So that's kind of the bigger picture. We've prepared and will have available kind of a layout that shows all the properties in Minneapolis that will require right-of-way acquisition that will likely entail a building acquisition as well. So let me explain what I mean. There's a lot of properties where we might need to buy 1 or 2 feet of right-of-way in order to widen the sidewalk or put in a turn lane or something like that. In some cases, that's not a big deal, and in some cases, the building is right on the property line. So even a 1 or 2 foot acquisition will mean acquisition of that building, that residence, that property. So we'll make all of those available to city staff. Here's where we are right now based on the layouts that we have in place. The actual amount of property, though, will always continue to be refined as we go through the final design process. If we can put in a wall and eliminate some acquisition, or we can, change a radius or those kind of things, we're going to continue to do that throughout design. Hopefully, what we've got is kind of worst possible case to best possible case for right-of-way. So I'm finalizing on where we are in next steps, and we're here in the fall of 2023, where we're going to hear about what we're doing with anti-displacement and those pieces. We're working towards next summer, where we've got 2 really key pieces. We're going to submit the draft supplemental environmental impact statement, a draft that will then go through all of the federal processes, public hearings, and final adoption, which will then be coinciding with the municipal consent process, which will then allow for approval by our local communities of the design plans and acceptance of the supplemental environmental impact statement. So those 2 things can be melded together to write a final environmental impact statement and put the project on its more final path. So where we are now is an adoption of a preferred route, but a lot of details to still be determined before it actually becomes the final route via municipal consent and the environmental impact statement. And those will take place, again, long-term, 2030, summer of 2030, which right now I hope to make. Working. When I started this project in 2015, I had no problem getting the opening day. I'm struggling now. So anyway, thank you. There's our piece.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We do have comments or questions from Councilmember Ellison.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you for the presentation. I didn't have too many questions throughout the presentation because I feel like I've just been in it with you guys along the way.
If there were a lot of things you hadn't heard, I would not be happy.
But I did want to ask a few questions, some for the sake of the public, and some for my colleagues, because for a lot of my colleagues, this is their first time sort of entering into this conversation. And I have found myself, the truth is that Northsiders ride public transit more than anyone in the region, right? And that's why I think this conversation is worthwhile. And for that reason, I've wanted to be just sort of like an unmitigated champion of this project. Obviously you start getting into the weeds of it. It can be, you kind of have to turn into maybe a little bit more of like a cautious champion of the project. And I've certainly heard from a lot of my neighbors, especially Lynn Park. And I feel like I think we all got a whole education on the feelings and the outcomes that the folks in Lynn Park felt like this project was going to have on their neighborhood. And I think the thing that makes me optimistic is that we were there in those meetings a lot of times, getting, sort of, hearing the truth of my neighbors in those backyard events. And you guys, I feel to this point, have been responsive to that. And so for my colleagues, who are extremely concerned, I guess, about where things are landing, whether on 10th, whether when we get north into like that small part into Ward 4, I do think that it might take a lot of getting yelled at in neighbors' backyards, but I do think that the project team has been pretty responsive to a lot of those concerns. A few things that I did want to ask, though, is I believe that there are there's a few sort of order of operations questions that I have that I think are really going to be required in order for this project to have some level of success. I'll start with sort of the business corridor questions that I have. I know that the West Broadway Business Coalition and others are, at least to this point, not happy with, how the project is shaping out. They've written letters, I think, that they've sent to you, they sent to us about what they want to see in the project, or that they kind of don't want to see the project. And I think a big way that the project team and this project could earn a lot of trust is to give folks some assurances, especially with those institutional, organizations like Camo J, like Pair of Dice, like Elamines Fish House, just as examples, who might feel those takings impacts. Some reassurances about that they're not going to be moved up and out of the north side, right? I think the problem has been, at least in how the conversation's been relayed to me, is that, well, we can't give assurances or we can't move forward until we know what we're doing, but folks don't want to know what we're doing until they get those assurances, which kind of gives us a little bit in this holding pattern. What are some things that we can do with organizations like the ones that I just named in order to give them some reassurance that, like, hey, look, there might be some impact here, but the project team is committed to making sure that you are not moved up and out of North Minneapolis?
Chair, thanks, council member. So a couple things. I mean, I'd go back to that bullet that I pointed to on the right-of-way slide, because I find that one pretty important. I don't like to scare people with, you're going to be bought out, you're going to be bought out. And so when I start working on projects early on, there's always a lot of kind of floating around. Now I think, and I have talked to, almost everybody you just mentioned, I've even talked to myself, and certainly our project team has. Now I think we can really sit down with each one of those property owners and talk about, what is your plan, right? Some property owners may say, because I've had it all across the board on projects I've worked on, now is my opportunity. I want to get purchased, I want to get a check, I want to close my business, and I want to go to somewhere sunnier in the winter and retire. And some have said, I absolutely want to keep my business in this demographic. And so I'm expecting that I will utilize the relocation portion of the right-of-way acquisition to relocate somewhere on the north side. Can you help me find a spot? Can you work with us? Can you start to talk about what that might mean? And then anywhere in between that. So we are committed to definitely doing that specifically for each of these properties that are going to be significantly impacted along here.
Thank you.
For example, and sorry,
No, go ahead.
Councilmember, for example, Elamine presents an interesting analysis there, right? Because when we talk with them, they're not concerned, of course, about the building. In fact, it might even be nice if we purchased it and then paid for the demo and removal of the building. But what they're concerned about is the what's left. What's the footprint that's left, and what can they do, and how might they be able to use that in other areas? And so that's really where that piece is.
Thank you. For 21st, I know that I think Commissioner Lundy was the one who sort of gave that scenario of folks who might not require being taken, but might want to be taken, right? Because they don't want to, either because they don't want to be right there against the line, or those kinds of things. So my question there is twofold. I guess a little more context I would give is, that stretch on 21st, a lot of it, kind of all the way down to Emerson, it really does have the feel of being on the backside of that commercial corridor. And so I feel like this presents an interesting opportunity for us to either eliminate the feeling of those residents being on the backside of something, or we can kind of further that feeling depending on how we engage. And so Given the kind of community engagement that happened along Lynn Park, you know, I'm not sure if I haven't had folks from 21st engage my office in the same way that folks in Lynn Park engage, but I would assume that, you know, the same way that you've got, you know, the Kim Smiths and Eva Youngs of Lynn Park, that those folks exist along 21st as well. What has been the level of engagement along 21st, and what kind of analysis are we, and these are kind of two different questions, what's been the level of engagement on 21st, and what's the plan to make sure that the folks on 21st can be heard every bit as much as the folks along Lyndale? And then what are going to be the design considerations to make sure that, you know, that the train feels like an integrated part of the neighborhood as opposed to bisecting folks and maybe further alienating them from the other side of the street?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Ellingson, so the question being, what have we done to work on the 21st section and engage that community, particularly the residential properties on the north side? And so we have been out doing outreach extensively in the last year. We didn't feel like we were hearing from some of those. We've done door knocking, so we have connected with everyone along 21st, but we're not getting the feedback and the people showing up like we are from the West Broadway corridor. So one thing we did recently was a block party. So we thought, well, maybe that would be a way to get the community out, do some fun activities for the kids, things like that. And we were able to talk to a few more people that way. So we would continue down that path. What I'll say, with all of the options we've had on the table and the driveway chats we've had, it's been a pleasure of ours to do all of that. But now that we're focused on one alignment, we can hone all of that effort into one alignment and really make sure that we're connecting with all those communities that we feel like we need to hear more from. So that's part of it. And then to talk about, how Dan mentioned it earlier, West Broadway and 21st, it's not West Broadway or 21st, it's West Broadway and 21st. So we're really looking forward to a corridor vision, working closely with your staff as well on what that can be for the community, both if you're a residential property right there or if you're a business. And then I'll also add, we've got anti-displacement presentation as well. And we don't necessarily assume that we should be taking out properties along the way, so we do an avoidance as kind of our first take as we're doing the design. If there's a way that, if there's more of a desire of the community to look at something different, we can start to look at that corridor in a different way and, different opportunities for those properties on the north side. So it's kind of the next step in the process, looking forward to really honing in all those efforts into a concerted effort, especially on 21st now.
Thank you. And I've got one more route-related question. I know that a lot of folks, myself included, have, I think that the strength of this project, I think, is really going to rely on the ability to lean into anti-displacement policy and deliver on anti-displacement policy. I think we've done an incredible job of examining it. So I've got some questions there. I know a lot of my colleagues have questions there. But last question on the route. It is sort of a tremendous opportunity to create some links, especially with the 94 trench there, to continuing to link North Minneapolis to the river and access to the river. But I was wondering why the I guess some of those improvements along West Broadway wouldn't extend all the way to the river. I think they sort of stop at Lyndale. Just interested to kind of hear some of the thinking there.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So, see, Chris switched from Met Council to county quickly, right? Because that's a little bit maybe of where this is, right? The project is able to do many things. We've made a determination in the project anyway right now that ought to be, that a reconstruction through Lyndale ought to be part of the LRT project. And so we're pursuing it that way. Should we build more on West Broadway? Should we make other improvements? I think the county and the city really need to sit down and talk about, can we develop a project there? Do we want to try to put more in the project? Do we want to try to do it outside of the project? Do we want to try to build it up there? So that discussion is ongoing. You can say, well, do we stop at the freeway? Do we stop at the river? Do we stop at Roseville? I mean, you can go, so there's a lot to that whole piece. And so that will be a discussion we'll have.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Ellison. And thank you, Mr. Solar. Appreciate it. I know we're going to get to the anti-displacement work in just a second. I thought it's a good spot, though. I wanted to add a couple comments after hearing this as well and this conversation around the alignment. And, first off, I got to say, I think light rail is a great thing. I actually bought my house and moved in the community I did because of the Blue Line being there. And so it's a part of my story as well, and I wouldn't be up here today. I wouldn't have probably lived in Ward 12 if not for the Blue Line being there. And so these projects have tremendous value, and they also really shape people's lives in the way that they're connected and the way that they choose their communities and grow within their communities as well. I'm also reflecting on the Southwest Light Rail process because I was one of the few council members around when that came through for municipal consent as well. And so, this is really more directed at my colleagues that are here and that will be returning next term as well. And I mentioned this at a committee meeting probably a couple months ago, but with Southwest Light Rail, at the time, Councilmember Goodman and I and others said, this should really go through Uptown. And we were told, well, that will add multiple years to the project, and that will cost at least $200 million more. And we can look back at that and say, boy, we should have really done something about that. We really probably should have pushed harder for that. And so when I hear concerns being raised by council members about these elements of this project, I would just encourage you to continue to have those conversations, to raise those concerns, and to seek out solutions. Municipal consent should never be a given on a project like this, and I think you all know your communities best. You're elected to represent the people in your communities. You're doing that when you're raising these concerns. And it sometimes might feel like too big of a thing. We're talking about $1 billion+ project that has been in the works for well over a decade. And yet it is so important for you to continue doing that work to resolve these concerns. You're never going to have a perfect project. These are complicated issues, especially when you have limited right-of-way. And so there are going to be trade-offs. There are going to be disappointments involved with it. But at the same time, this is a project that once it's built is going to be around for probably 100 years. And it's going to have a lot of impact. And so please keep representing your communities on that, raising your voices, doing that work. I think you have a team, it seems like, at least from my evaluation, that is working in partnership very closely with the city, is trying to learn and trying to adjust their ways in which they work based off of the past projects and trying to do better, which is what we expect and they should do, and that's a great thing. And so I'm encouraged as well by the way that they've received these comments today, and that hopefully they'll continue working closely as well so that we can move into that question of municipal consent with confidence and feeling like the community's concerns have been answered. So those are my comments. Thank you, colleagues. And I'm guessing Mr. Anderson, are you up? Yep. All right, perfect, please. Welcome. And I might get up to stretch my back here as well, so just ignore that.
Hello, and thank you. I'm Kathy Gold with Hennepin County, and I serve also with the Blue Line Extension as the anti-displacement representative, leading the work, and also C. Terrence Anderson with Center for Urban and Regional Affairs at the University of Minnesota has been a great partner in this first leg of the work and getting our anti-displacement community members to provide some recommendations. So just before we get into a little bit of the background piece, just want to let you know how we got here. And so when we pivoted the project, as Dan alluded to, off of the railroad corridor, we also heard very loudly and clearly from our community members and advocates that anti-displacement strategies and policies are necessary for this project to proceed in a way where community that exists in this corridor is the benefactors of this investment. And so, that led the request for proposal, and we're very grateful that Kira was at the forefront of that whole work and really provided the technical and facilitation of the anti-displacement work group. So I'm going to let C. Terrence introduce himself and then proceed with the first slide here.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Council members, Chair, thank you for being here. It's been a long time since I've been in this room, but it's great to be in here today to have this conversation about anti-displacement related to the Blue Line extension. So yes, I'm C. Terrence Anderson, Director of Community-Based Research at the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs, or CURE, at the University of Minnesota. So I think really the biggest thing to start with is that this work really builds off a lot of work. Of course, you can see the map in here from our 2017, the Diversity of Gentrification Report, which looked at gentrification and displacement throughout the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul quite comprehensively. So you can see for that map, this isn't just a conversation in the Blue Line corridor, but this is a conversation in a lot of your wards. And I think certainly a lot of the learnings in this process are probably relevant to each of your wards as well, too. And so, I would imagine that a lot of the policies that we talk about won't just be for the Blue Line Extension corridor. They'll likely be for the city of Minneapolis as a whole. I don't know that. You're the policymakers, but certainly it's relevant, I think, to a lot of the conversations that y'all are having. And again, this isn't a new conversation. As Councilmember Vitale said, this has been a conversation for over 15 years within the Blue Line Extension corridor. So our work builds across that, builds upon that. For me, I started with the West Broadway Transit Study in 2016, which was one of the first studies of rail on at this time it was streetcar. So I've knocked all the doors up and down West Broadway, and for the C line and for the D line as well too. So I'm really, really quite familiar with this area, particularly from a transit perspective, from the perspective of transit development and the perspective of displacement. And so it was, I think, kind of a circular moment or a coming home moment for me in some ways to do this work in this project. I think I also want to remind that the city, for the C line, had the Penn Avenue Community Works, a partnership between Hennepin County and the city of Minneapolis, which I think was actually, in a small way, anti-displacement project related to transit development that already existed, right? So there was a lot of investment into the houses for people to redo their facades, to move, improve the Jefferson School on Penn Avenue as well too. So that's a precursor, and I think I encourage all of you to go back and look at that as a model for this work. This work, however, was an 18-month process where we really brought together the city staff from each of the different cities, all the different constituents, including advocates, the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition, and others, not just in Minneapolis, but throughout the corridor as well. There was not folks from the North Loop because at the time the route wasn't in the North Loop, so we didn't have those folks there. But I think when you sort of understand it from the perspective of anti-displacement, we're really concerned in the city's perspective with North Minneapolis. So the anti-displacement working group did a lot over this 18-month process. We centered around these really large meetings that had kept them in the room for 8 hours. It was literally 8 hours, 6 8-hour Saturdays where we poured through a variety of information. We went through lessons from previous light rail, so to Councilmember Payne's question before, we did a deep dive into Central Corridor as well as the Blue Line Corridor to see what happened, particularly from an anti-displacement perspective. We had folks from each of those corridors come to this process and share their lessons. And of course, we studied a lot of data as well about what happened to businesses and residents along that corridor. But we also focused on business and cultural displacement, housing displacement in this corridor, as well as developing a variety of different recommendations to address all those contexts that we learned and the concerns that we heard from this community. And I will name the first thing that we did within this process was review all of the comments that had went to the Blue Line project, and we analyzed them for relevance to anti-displacement. So I've seen a lot about this line. This project has been cognizant of a lot, really going back all those 15 years, each of the different studies, into the context of shaping what the conversations were in this room. There's really a lot to say in this process. We wrote a 200-page report. It really could have been 2,000 pages, and so I encourage conversation and dialogue, and I'm happy to have as many conversations as y'all want about this. Ultimately, all that work, the 18-month body of work led to these three things. 17 policies that support the recommended outcomes. We studied about 50 different policies in the context of this room, but sort of whittling them down within the context of what fits the sort of the legal context that we're in, what fits the resources that we think will be available for delivering anti-displacement, as well as just like where sort of we feel within sort of the political realm where there might be support for things. Some things, of course, test the Overton window. Some things are already conversations that, in particular, this body has already had. But remember, this is reflective of the entire corridor. So Crystal and Robbinsdale, Brooklyn Park, as well as the Park Board as well too. Each of those recommendations are broken down within the context of our jurisdiction. So of course you'll see those 17 policies, but you'll see what was specifically recommended from Minneapolis and or within the context of Minneapolis. And just so as a procedural explanation, we had a North Minneapolis subgroup within this conversation as well too, who got to talk about their own community without the sort of the reflection of Crystal and Robbinsdale or Brooklyn Park as well too. So it really is a north side conversation that's reflected, we think, in our report. They also underlined recommended principles for delivering those recommendations. As you'll see about each of the different policies, some of these things the city are already doing, or some things are already being talked about. Within each of these policies, there's a lot of different versions of them, right? And of course, you've had those discussions at this, on this dais. But what the anti-displacement working group was most concerned with is not necessarily that these recommendations would be adopted, but whether they'd be adopted to the value and principle in which they're being recommended, right? So you can do these things better or worse in the context of anti-displacement, but really mostly being concerned about, will these recommendations deliver anti-displacement? And I think a really good framing, Ricardo Perez, organizer from the Alliance of Metropolitan Stability, one of his reframings for this project isn't just anti-displacement, it's how does community thrive as a result of the Blue Line extension, not just survive the Blue Line extensions, right? So I think that's a higher interpretation of what we're trying to accomplish in this process. Yeah. So here's the recommendations that are specific to Minneapolis. Providing opportunities for community to connect to Blue Line light rail and development in a joyful way. Existing residents and businesses to stay in place and feel supported. Community ownership and being able to measure levels of community ownership. Empowering community to have control over decision-making throughout the corridor. Creating and enforcing structures of accountability for government agencies along the alignment. Addressing reparations to the Harrison neighborhood from the previous route alignment. So folks may remember, you've already talked about, the line initially existed around Highway 55. One of the things that our research has revealed is that impacts for anti-displacement is happening earlier and earlier with each line. So for the Blue Line, originally it was after the line was completed. For Central Corridor, it was once the line got full funding grant agreement from the feds, so that was before construction. With the Southwest Light Rail and the Blue Line, we're seeing it even before full funding grant agreement. So even though the previous line didn't get to that place, the effects of displacement already started occurring. And so there's already harm done as a result of this line in Harrison and other parts of the Blue Line corridor. And so part of the anti-displacement strategy is not just to leave those communities, even if the line's not in those places today, but to sort of repair that harm as a result of the light rail today, as well as ensuring that there are sufficient resources to support policy implementation, organizing efforts, community development and ownership, and other anti-displacement strategies. There's access to land, housing, and businesses in the corridor throughout all phases of construction. 50% of jobs from the Botno Light Rail should be held by corridor residents, and that there is a continued role for anti-displacement working group members throughout all phases of the project. So these recommendations reflect the outcomes that the anti-displacement policies are trying to get to. Some policies work across multiple parts of these outcomes. Some of them are individual, but ultimately they should work together as recommended by community to achieve this. And I believe the next slide will dive into what those actual policies are.
So the policies that were outlined within the recommendation report, we have annotated here, and where we feel like are some opportunities here for prioritizing policies would be starred in the purple color there. Mandatory relocation assistance, tenant opportunity to purchase, limiting investor purchasing, corporate ownership, land disposition policy, right to return, rent stabilization, commercial and residential land trust, 0 to low interest loans, financial resources for organizing the right to organize, small business grants, small business support, and under that, workforce programs, NOAA preservation, naturally occurring affordable housing, inclusionary zoning, universal basic income or guaranteed basic income, right to counsel and tenant protections, commercial and residential, cultural and placekeeping and placemaking. So what will it take for implementation? A lot of coordination, collaboration, and commitment by all of us agencies along the corridor, in addition to really making sure that we have investment and partnership from all sorts, public, private, philanthropic, and community organizations, and that we have transparency within our decision-making, and that means bringing community members to the table to have that check, to make sure what we're doing is actually what the community is asking us to do. So transitioning to implementation throughout this next year's time frame as we move into municipal consent. We've already communicated the recommendations. We'll be engaging communities in developing an implementation plan, which is really what the CMC did in their resolution in June by asking us to put together a framework and an engagement plan around this work that really has that checks and balances again, where we're involving community members and our leadership to guide the way so we come to a consensus in how we proceed. Prioritizing strategies before, during, and after construction. Obviously, we'd like to prioritize those before activities in our policies and strategies as we start out in this work, and then bring implementing partners together for action, which we'll be doing next week on Tuesday with our partner agencies for the City of Minneapolis. Ms. Joey Dobson, Mr. Eric Hansen, and Mr. Jim Voll will be at that convening. So what did we hear about our recommendations? There's some things illustrated here as we put the recommendation report out online. We asked for feedback from our community members, and you'll see here a gamut of things that, the desired outcomes for the strategies, who they were, what was the most important to folks. And so a lot of different things here: safety, affordable housing, making sure we're addressing those construction impacts, prioritizing small businesses, accountability for us as government agencies, working on our workforce program and empowering that community decision-making, transparency around project progress, and then opportunities for community members to own. And then we asked, what strategies would you personally prioritize? And I'll go on the larger spectrum here: cultural placemaking and placekeeping, in addition to, again, naturally occurring affordable housing preservation, small business grants, and zero to low interest loans, in addition to limiting investor purchasing or corporate ownership, and mandatory relocation service. So then we asked, what weren't considered, and what strategies do you think we should consider? And you can see here there's the larger things is let's work on the crime, housing, business, culture, with preservation, affordability, renewal, and access and heritage being some other notes. So our timeline for anti-displacement, on the first line, we are marching along with the project timeline, and so that's illustrated in that first piece. But then as we start working on this next piece of the leg of the work, we were asked, the CMC asked us to, in resolution, develop a framework. So really looking to work toward that and releasing a draft in the spring of 2024 and finalizing that framework, as we need to go through that process of transparency and making sure that all members, community, and our agency partners are in alignment with that. For resourcing, coordinating our budgets and staffing and our intergovernmental relations strategies as we're working through that. I know the county has started looking at that work today and progressing toward that. And then, as I noted, engaging with our community and agency partners here in August so that we can co-develop a meeting schedule and engagement strategy. And then in our community engagement spectrum, developing that engagement plan in addition to a late Q3 convening with the anti-displacement work group that we're hoping will transition more into that advisory committee, naming that a Community Prosperity Advisory Committee. This last slide is some work, and I'm going to let C. Terrence speak to this as Kira kind of initiated this work, but I think it's really cool, and this will be shaping the vision or of what community members, when they see these illustrations, with the anti-displacement work. And so this will be kind of the theme of our color scheme and also, how we're talking about and framing up anti-displacement.
And I guess the important, so this is work done by Corey Nakamura-Lin, who was an organizer who used to live in Minneapolis, now lives in Chicago. But I think what this is ultimately communicating is I think what we hear from community is that the Blue Line Light Rail and anti-displacement are things that come together, or that need to come together to reflect the best vision of what this project can be. And that's certainly the intention that I've heard from the project team as well about what this reflects. But Corey, I think, did some beautiful work where she engaged some of the anti-displacement working group members to create some visuals to be able to communicate and engage community about the anti-displacement work. And this is where this work comes back. So I think spending some time with this work I think would be great. Consistent community involvement toward commitments, spacious process to make room to build consent, family-centered transit are some themes that came out of this work that I think add additional layers and context and nuance to what these anti-displacement policies are meant to be. Of course, you can read all the different policies and sort of see what they are, but I think what's most important to connect to is the outcomes that the community is envisioning about what ultimately a Blue Line Light Rail that supports their vision of prosperity and thriving in this community looks like. And so we're appreciative of Corey Lynn for producing these and ultimately what they add to the report. So I think, stay connected, but I know we're running out of time here, but so I think questions is the next thing we're diving in.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you. We have Councilmember Chugdai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to actually start with thanking Ms. Beckwith and Mr. Solar, along with Ms. Gold and Mr. Anderson for your presentation today. Very extensive, a lot of information. This was my first experience really getting into the weeds on this project and understanding a lot more the amount of work over a number of years that has gotten into it. So really appreciate the amount of information that you shared. And then for those who have taken questions so far, receiving those in good faith and engaging with them, that shows me a lot of hope and promise for what our partnership can look like on this project moving forward. I think what I've heard from other council members so far today is, asking genuine questions around what the impact of this project is going to be on their communities and their constituents, right? Like, can my community thrive as a result of this? Can we prevent displacement of businesses and residents in this area? And is our current pieces of this project going to have the opposite effect? I also see the project team in particular prioritizing working with businesses to make one-on-one plans for the lead up to construction and figuring out what relocation or takings might look like. And I really appreciate the amount of thoroughness that has gone into it so far and hope that will continue. And it sounds like it will. I see that type of one-on-one work as one form of anti-displacement work. I think the reality of displacement in the context of large-scale infrastructure projects and investments is the generational impact of who is able to exist, who is able to survive, and who is able to thrive in that community for the decades that come after. And this story or this fear of, a house on 21st being bought up and then turned into a 4-story apartment building that people who lived in that neighborhood can no longer afford is real. But I think the result of that fear sometimes can be a decision point of are we going to make a necessary and critical and generational infrastructure investment in a historically underinvested in or divested in community, or are we instead going to choose to not put anything there at all? And I think that choice is false, and the anti-displacement work group is, and your work is a testament to that. I didn't realize this was, the first of its kind in the nation of a work group of this sort. And my fear of your work, I've read the 200-page report. It's very extensive, really appreciate it. And I see 17 different policy choices, and there's, in-depth under each policy recommendation that you make. You spend a lot of time telling us which versions of those policies are implemented in a community right now. So there's, there's one on renter, tenant screening reform, right? There's a version of that exists in Minneapolis right now, and the recommendation from the anti-displacement work group is to go much further than where the city is right now. So appreciate the amount of thoroughness in looking in at each jurisdiction and saying, what do you have in place right now, to what extent, and where do you need to go in order to prevent displacement? And so I think my actual question here, and Mr. Anderson, it's not directed at you. It's actually directed both at Hennepin County and at Metro Transit, or the Met Council here. But essentially, are you going to let this work group and its recommendations become a thing that we just talk about, and a thing that we are just proud of? Or are you going to do the work of pushing local jurisdictions like the city of Minneapolis to actually implement these anti-displacement measures? Essentially, are you serious about anti-displacement or not, right? And ultimately, most of these things are land use and policy decisions that local governments like the city of Minneapolis have to make. But should we look forward to a letter from both of these entities saying to us, please implement these policies? And what is, so I'm gonna leave it there for now. Whoever wants to take that.
Mr. Chair and Council Member, thank you so much for that question and the support. Yes, we're serious. This is not just implemented by the Blue Line Project team, which is why, as Kathy mentioned, we're taking that a step further. We're convening this meeting to kind of take the next step, to develop the framework, to report back to the Corridor Management Committee. I think the idea of us sending a letter, a joint letter from Hennepin County and Met Council to the cities, that's a really good idea on kind of just, here's where we're at with anti-displacement. Here's kind of, there's a few things that could be, as Kathy has said, could be implemented by the cities earlier and are within the city's jurisdiction. We want to make sure those are staying at the forefront so that you know the things that you can do now that are clearly outside of the project itself. And so, yes, we are serious, and yes, it will be a partnership across all of the cities, Met Council, Metro Transit, Hennepin County, and other entities as well. I don't know if Kathy has anything to add to that.
Ms. Cerny, welcome back to City Hall.
Thank you, Chair Johnson and Councilmember Chugtai. I'm Lisa Cerny. I'm the Assistant County Administrator and over the line of business for Public Works. I just want to share on behalf of the Hennepin County perspective, we have a disparity reduction line of business, and this work started in the transportation domain, which is one domain of many domains that we are working on, and it's very closely connected with our disparity reduction and anti-displacement and really transitioning that into community prosperity. So 100%, we are committed to this work, and we are, as Kathy demonstrated in the timeline, pulling together partners. We need partners, whether that be city partners, philanthropic, community, and all kinds of other agencies at the state level and the federal level. So that is how committed we are.
That's awesome. And I asked this question because the 17 recommendations, the 17 policy recommendations made by the work group are, I think, really important, really visionary, but they're also incredibly bold. And without serious pressure, they won't happen. They will not become reality. And so when I think about municipal consent and when I think about the next 7 years before this project is complete, this is the time for us to be implementing these policies because most of them will also require funding They will require years of testing and scaling to meet need and to function the way that they're supposed to, or function the way they're intended to. And so, when we're thinking about municipal consent and what I'm going to be looking for, should I be here, making that decision is, did you do what you could? Did you do everything you could to push cities like Minneapolis and other local governments to implement the anti-displacement policy recommendations in our cities to truly prioritize anti-displacement work along this corridor? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. One, yes, absolutely. Thank you too for your work on this. This is incredible. I think that when I'm talking to folks in the community who have a high level of skepticism about this project, the thing that gives them a degree of comfort around our ability to execute this project is the anti-displacement work. And so I think that it does a lot to build a lot of credibility. I think that the project team prioritizing, working, especially with Kira and working on this work is it's a sign of going in the right direction. And so to kind of piggyback off of a lot of what Councilmember Chuktai laid out, I'm wondering from you all, what form does this, in what form does your work continue as we move through the project? And then I'll have a few follow-up questions.
Chair and Councilmember Ellison, we anticipate that we will continue with our partnership with Kira to advance this work. Where it makes the most sense is all that community trust, right? Kira is a trusted community resource, and I think their involvement is necessary for us to keep progressing within this work. Also to convene that advisory committee that we're going to transition from the work group into Community Prosperity Advisory Committee. It seems a natural course of that. In addition, the accountability metrics, they've done all the research, right? They know the policies, and they can help us to have that transparency of whether these policies are achieving the outcomes that were recommended. And if they're not, how do we pivot? How do we change course to make sure that we're on the right journey here to benefit our community members?
And I'll say, yeah, definitely trust and credibility are a major part of the work, and so just grateful. A lot of folks in the community obviously know UC Terrence, and not only as a professional and a researcher, but also as a resident of North Minneapolis, and so I think that to have a resident of North Minneapolis leading in this work is really important. I know that there has been some conversation with, at least at the electeds level, about this money piece, what it's going to cost. When it comes to things like disposition policy, when it comes to things like, gaining site control, do we have a sense of, for example, how much of the commercial corridor we think either Northsiders or the city or the county needs to have in order to make sure that we have site control to see the corridor develop in the way that we want versus leaving it up to the market? Do we have, I guess, a level of analysis on what's needed and how much it would cost?
There's a level of analysis that's been done. So we know where all the properties are. We know who owns each of the different properties.
You don't have to give me the number on it. Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't have a number for you just because that's going to be, acquisition's a tricky and very legal thing. But we have a sense of the properties. I think I could be confident about communicating that or mapping that thing. How much it will cost will be a different story that will be answered in due time. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess I just ask it because I know that, like my commitment, I think in my conversation with the mayor, his commitment, and I know that I think I can speak on my colleagues in this front, is, the cost of anti-displacement, there's certainly a lot of will, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know that any single level of government could foot that bill, right? And so making sure that there is a level of collaboration and that individual municipalities or levels of government aren't stuck sort of like holding the bag, so to speak, when it comes time to deliver, I think is really the kind of, assurance that folks are looking for.
Yeah, and I'll just say the work group considered where funding would be available when making the recommendations to make sure that this isn't just I think it is bold, absolutely, to what's been said, but I think it's very achievable. We engage the philanthropic community as part of this process. They know that they're going to have a role in this, and that's going to be part of the next steps. We know the federal government will, of course, play a role. Of course, state government, county in each of the cities, and otherwise will play a role in funding these. And I think when you look at it in that broad context of who can fund this, very, very achievable. I think the group was throwing around, how do we get $1 billion? And like in my mind, that seemed really bold in the room, but when you really think through it, triple that has been invested in the Green Line extension corridor to this date, right? If not like quadruple at this point, right? And so I think it's worth thinking about it in that context, that this type of investment of this magnitude already exists in abundance in this community. And so, yeah.
Thank you. And last, I guess, comment that I'll leave on is I think that the North Minneapolis, and I'm biased because I'm born and raised there and represent there, I think deserves sort of an unprecedented level of engagement on this level in anti-displacement. I think that's why I'm really encouraged by it. And I think that there has been a lot of, I think what I've seen though, both from community members, which I fully understand, as well as a number of electeds, maybe even up here, is a disbelief that we will deliver. And so that's kind of directed at all of us. That's directed at me. That's directed at the project team. It's directed at your work. There's sort of a disbelief that we'll deliver. And so I think that I'm excited to continue working with you all. The amount of effort that's gone into studying the problem, coming up with solutions, making these recommendations has been great. And so I want to make sure that I hold myself accountable, hold the project team accountable, and everyone in terms of delivering on that promise and all that good research. Because as Councilmember Chuktai said, we can sort of take the 200-page document, file it away, pat ourselves in the back, be really proud of ourselves, and maybe wheel it out every single time we want to brag, right? Or we can like really deliver on it and feel and demonstrate to the community, demonstrate to North Minneapolis that we're serious about it. And I think, I actually think that the project faces a bit of an existential reality when it comes to delivering on those anti-displacement things. I know that there are a number of council members who are going to need to feel like that demonstration has been done, especially as we approach municipal consent and those kinds of things. And so. So anyway, so thank you for the work, and I certainly think that the North Side deserves it.
Thank you, Council Member. Vice Chair Rainville.
Very briefly, Councilmember Ellison, I want to thank you for your well thought out observations, but in particular for the word disbelief, because I think that's what you all have to leave here with today. We don't believe you. I should say, I don't believe you. I've seen what's happened throughout this community, and in particular East Hennepin, your lack of community engagement there, just the way that whole bus corridor worked out. So you've heard us loud and clear today, I hope. Let's move forward and see what we can do to help the citizens, because as one of you said earlier, this route is for the citizens, and that's why we are so passionate, because that's who we represent. We represent the citizens of Minneapolis, and up until now, I have great disbelief.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I'm not seeing any other colleagues in queue for comments or questions. And I think that is the end of our presentations today. I really want to thank you for being here for this great presentation, for the project team for showing up, for listening, for taking the feedback, and for the continued work together. And not seeing, I'll also mention we did lose a couple of colleagues due to meetings along the way, so people had stuff on the schedule. So not seeing any other business before us, I'm going to direct the clerk to receive and file this and call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
that I get to do is I go out and work on pollinator habitat. There's been recent research that's showing that bee populations